Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered the sixth Independence Day address of his tenure from the Red Fort, the first of his second term. A speech that began with the current hot topic of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, moved through the kind of challenges and opportunities that will come India's way in the next few years, the state of the economy and the environment. Joining us to talk about what the key takeaways of the speech were are Nilanjan Sarkar, Assistant Professor at Ashoka University and Senior Visiting Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, Amitabh Tiwari, Political Commentator and Strategist, and Manoj Sinha, Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Nilanjan, let me start with you. Before we drill down on some of the things that he touched upon and spent some time talking about, with the speech done, what did you take away from it?
So I have to say that I was piecing it together. I was actually traveling as the speech was going on. I mean, look, I don't think that we should be ever taking away too much from speeches like this. They are speeches to the nation. They're there to sort of set the agenda more generally. Obviously 370 has to be discussed and the economy has to be discussed. And so given where the country is. So I think, in terms of what we expected, this is sort of what one might have expected. I think that one of the more general themes of what we're seeing with this government is some notion of thinking about the country in central terms, in single national terms, and that's a theme that we sort of saw carried.
All right, Manoj Joshi, he went through the fact that at a time like this, there is so much conversation happening on what's happening in Kashmir, and back-ended the speech with issues on terror. There was only one mention of Pakistan. On a strategic front, as what this country sends out a message to the rest of the world right now, on matters of national security, on law and order and things like that, on those fronts, what was the key takeaway?
I think the basic takeaway was the decision of his government to focus inwards, in the sense economic, political, social transformation of the country. That seemed to me to be the message that he was sending out. He spoke of the need for one nation, one election. He spoke of the nation of unifying the nation, in the sense the GST, etc. He spoke of the Chief of Defense Staff for the armed forces, an extremely important decision. He spoke about the need to get rid of the cobwebs of the past, in which he included the Article 370, Article 35A. He said these were kind of obstructions. And he spoke of eliminating poverty, spoke of better social life, smaller families, population control, water, very important issue. So essentially the focus was inward looking, the transformation of the nation in social, political and economic terms.
Amitabh, the fact that the BJP in its 38, 39 years of existence has enjoyed the support of the small businessmen even well before Mr. Modi and those that have been intermediaries in the economic process. In the message sent out to, again, I'm trying to understand who that message was to, saying don't view wealth creators with suspicion, see them as people with whom a multiplier effect happens. Who's that message to? Is that to the common citizen who Mr. Modi believes is still in a socialist idea that is suspicious of wealth? Or is that message to the arms of his own government that seem at quite a distance to the message he is sending out? That there is one thing Mr. Modi is saying, and the way his government operates and arms of it via officers and things like that, that there is a distance that needs to be bridged.
See, I think the message was to the bureaucracy or to the officials in the finance ministry. See, the issue of tax terrorism due to the death of the CCT founder and the tax on the super rich and the CSR rules which make it even a punishable offense, these things were leading to the creation of an assumption that this government is anti-wealth creator. And that is why this message is from the Prime Minister to soothe the nerves of the wealth creators, even going to the extent of telling that the wealth creators are India's wealth. So this message was in that context, I believe.
So inward towards the bureaucracy and officers of his own government, not to necessarily citizens. That's interesting to use this platform to speak to your own government. Further point on the economy, Nilanjan. If you go back to this first speech 5 years ago in 2014, what he set out then in what was then a speech that was a forerunner to what was attempted as Make in India, where he invited multiple sectors and those that operate around the world to come to India to make here. The distance traveled from then to now, that the entrepreneurship that he speaks of now is at the micro level, at the district level of locally made things. The point Mr. Joshi made, that it's an inward-looking speech and saying that look at what's being made elsewhere. That the engines of the economy seems to have shifted in his vision. That this is not an economy right now that will generate employment out of focus sectors going up to scale in the global level, but will have to work at a micro level, one by one, area by area.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, he is as aware of the macroeconomic challenges in India and actually internationally as well at the moment. And sort of making a speech or making sort of grand declarations about which sectors are going to see job growth is just not a smart idea at the moment. I mean, I think that he is somewhat constrained by what the economic realities in this country are. And these are the kinds of sort of economic moves that you expect the leader to talk about. These are the kinds of assurances that people in the country want. I also want to sort of comment on that wealth generation comment. I do think that there was a concern among the business environment that, given already the macroeconomic challenges and given some of the sort of tax terrorism, et cetera, that we've seen, that this government could take a particularly hard line to keep the poor happy and really make business interests or put business interests on the back foot. And I do think that some of this is just soothing those nerves. Okay. A lot of this is inward-looking, but making sure that where capital is being created, that those people are kept happy because they're going to be the only ones doing things.
Just a follow-up question on that. For that to be credible, what would you like, or what would entrepreneurs like to see done to make sure that that message, as Amitabh said, was inward to the arms of the government, that this tone is followed through by change in attitudes at the bureaucracy level and at the way the policy is currently structured need to move?
I mean, I don't have any deep, concrete suggestions other than the fact that, we are in a situation today where there still are, the ease of doing business is not where it should be. So to the extent that there are internal impediments to economic growth, I mean, those are things that, of course, need to be addressed. Okay. I said there's not much you can do about the the international economy. Okay. And I'm not sure that that's part of the reason why we had inward-looking. What can you say about it? Yeah.
All right. Let me get to the point that Manoj Joshi mentioned, the time spent on talking about water. Mr. Joshi, front and center has been brought in this speech the fact that we're a country that in the imminent future will have to deal with a number of issues related to water availability. The fact that at times water gets to us, fresh water gets to us in its excess, we don't know what to do with it. There have been natural calamities as a result of both excess water and too little water in this country. Did he give people a sense of the scale of what the challenges in this are? Because he spoke about rainwater harvesting, he spoke about irrigation, he mentioned 3-4 things. As this program gets rolled out, will he be able to take to people the scale of the challenge that India faces on this?
I think he will, in the sense that, he has had some experience on this in Gujarat. And I think the awareness that in India, the problem is still effective water management, and water management ranges from disincentive, this kind of large-scale policies are needed, for example, disincentivizing rice production in certain areas where people are using tube well water to grow rice. Now, the point is, it's not enough to say that here you can't grow rice anymore. You've got to do it in a more subtle fashion. You have to have policy measures unveiled for that. So there are a range of issues out there. And I think the government has had the experience of, for example, a campaign against open defecation. And I think that's been reasonably successful. So I think these social campaigns, one thing about Mr. Modi is that he has this intense desire to be also seen and leave an imprint on history as a reformer, as a person who took the ordinary issues of ordinary people and did something with it. And I think water, he senses that water is one issue, huge challenge in this country, but a challenge which I think is doable, because actually, as you see, it's not the scarcity of water which is the issue, at least till now. It's really the management of that water. And if that can be done, and I think he announced a huge investment to begin that process, and if we can get it underway, I think definitely this is something which is achievable in the next 5 years.
All right. Amitabh, how much of his own political fortune and his political capital rests on this issue of water? In the studies we tried to do with you in the lead up to the general election, we found pockets where this was an issue that perhaps people are attaching to the state government and in their particular areas. How much of this, now that he's made it a key point and a key point of his narrative, as time goes on, how much of whether people feel at ease or not about water availability will be something he'll be held accountable for down the road?
See, what is the strong point of Modi is that he involves people in his schemes to make them successful. So Swachh Bharat or the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao or the call to the affluent class to give up subsidy are some of the examples. So public participation or citizen involvement is key in most of the social projects he speaks about, water being one. So while he lays down the foundation of what the government will be doing, let's say of linking of rivers or rainwater harvesting and other projects, he also he's also making a clarion call on the individuals or the citizens to save water, to do their bit to make India water rich, or so that it does not suffer from water scarcity. So what is also happening is that we are also seeing that we are having too much rain in a lesser span, which makes up for the entire deficit, which is leading to flash floods in some areas. So he always tries to involve the people, and how much it will be on the political fallout if he does not succeed. See, what has also happened is that we're talking about economy is in a slowdown. Economy was a challenge. Jobs and economy were a challenge in the later years of Modi 1.2 as well. But what people we have seen is that who is in a better position to solve those problems, and they probably, because of his persona and because of the way he has handled the issues and because of the promises he has delivered, people still feel that he is the best person to solve most of the problems. But that's another 3-4 years down the line. But we'll have to see whether some alternative leadership develops from the opposition to challenge Modi and make him accountable for his promises like water.
Okay, by extending that point about water to other similar environment-related points, if we can bring in the fact that he touched upon, Nilanjan, the point on population, the point on plastic use, the use of fertilizers and chemicals that hurt the earth, what's his narrative here? Is he saying, look, we are at a fragile, again, to the people, saying we are at a fragile point in how the human species rests on this earth, and that needs to change. And in effect, at a time when elsewhere in the world, in Australia, in America, and 2-3 other places, that those that championed the climate's cause have retreated, that he sees a scope to break through as one of the world's the climate warriors.
I think that's right. I mean, India has obviously a very complicated relationship with climate agreements around the world, so let's not oversell. But I do think that the government, I think Narendra Modi understands the importance of thinking about the environment at this moment in India, given a lot of the concerns that we have about water, about pollution, about green space, all sorts of issues that we're facing in India. And I think the average person sees. And it requires strong central action, coordinated action, the kind of thing that this government has shown that it's better at than almost any other previous government. So it is something that the Prime Minister can really leave his mark on the system. I mean, that is different than the groundwater situation, right? I mean, I think that is something that if you go to the rural countryside, every farmer knows, right? I mean, they don't need to be told that the water table is going down and the water is an issue. And that, I think, is very much dealing with something that is coming in the very near future and is something that could be a political issue against the BJP. Whereas these kinds of environmental issues are leaving a mark on this.
All right. Mr. Joshi, on the fact that he chose to mention the setting up of a Chief of Defence Staff, this was a recommendation that came up right after the study done after the Kargil War and the way the forces and their leadership needed to be reformed. The idea itself is close to 20 years old. Why does an administrative change like this become something that he mentions in an Independence Day speech? What's the point in making such an administrative change a public pitch?
Well, this is interesting. I was a member of the Naresh Chandra Commission. We also recommended the similar thing in 2011, 2012. And in fact, it goes back beyond, even before the Kargil Review Commission, it goes to the Arun Singh Committee report in 1990s. So right from that time onward, there has been a feeling that you need better integration in the armed forces. And that's the key to reforming the armed forces. Right now, if you look at it, eventually the idea is that you set up theater commands. Today, if on the eastern side, if you see, Navy's Eastern Command is in Visakhapatnam, Army's is in Kolkata, and the Air Force is in Shillong. So if you were fighting a battle in the eastern sector, you would have commands which are almost 2,000 kilometers apart. So it's an absurd situation. Now, the reason why Prime Minister had to announce it is that this has been blocked over all these years. In part, it has been blocked by opposition from within the services. In the sense, each of the services, meaning the service chiefs, think that their authority will be diminished if such a Chief of Defence Staff is appointed. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that the bureaucracy has opposed it. The bureaucracy, unfortunately, we have what I call a non-expert civilian bureaucracy running our Ministry of Defence. Now, these non-experts are masters of procedure rather than experts in their subject. So what they do is that they are able to divide the three services because they have three different leaderships. So I think eventually, after all these years, and I'm talking as someone who was very much involved in this process, it became very clear that this decision had to be taken at the apex political level. Okay. It has to be rammed down people's throat.
So you're saying,
this is not an unusual.
So the fact that mentioning it helps build some political impetus for it to be rammed through, that it needed something like this so that it gets followed through on, is what you're saying.
Well, you see, what I'm saying is that in the US, integration has been brought in through a legislation. The Goldwater-Nichols Act back in, I think, late 80s. Till that legislation came, the US armed forces were not integrating. They were kind of resisting the process. Same thing is happening here. So I think we needed the Prime Minister to take ownership of the process, because once the Prime Minister sends the signal, it goes down the line, and it has to be, as I said, political. Okay. All countries which have dealt with this, in China, it is Xi Jinping who pushed through the reform between 2013 and 2015. So for a variety of reasons, this is not something which can be done by bureaucracies. It must be done politically. And I'm very glad that the Prime Minister has taken it up. I hope that he sees this as the beginning of a process, not its end.
Okay. Nilanjan, on to a point that for me, I wasn't sure how to interpret, because he said something that goes into a classification of political thought and how the Western world understands right-of-center conservative thought. There was a point where he was speaking about abolishing old laws, and then he went into an anecdote about how he would ask bureaucrats and officers around him how to lessen the interference, and the word he said, of government in people's lives. And that he went on to say that a free India is one where people self-determine, that it's not the government that determines what you do. Traditional Western conservative thought. Does that apply to India? What was he trying to say by that?
I was trying to figure it out just like you. I think at the moment we've actually seen the state being quite active in a lot of sectors. So, I'm not sure that kind of laissez-faire interpretation is actually consistent with the way that the government has been making policy recently, perhaps out of necessity. Does it signal something about the fears of citizens about the state? The only thing that I can get out of this, and where there has been some political mileage, is not thinking about the state abstractly, but thinking about the bureaucracy, but the citizen directly. And the government, and Modi has been very good at sort of arguing that he is disciplining the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy has treated you badly. There has been corruption. And these are the kinds of things that I'm bringing to you. I'm bringing power to the people. So perhaps seen from that lens, there's something there. I don't know that there's a larger sort of manifesto here about laissez-faire or even a genuine notion of minimal governance, minimum government, even though that is a claim that's made in the past by Modi himself.
Amitabh, to the point that multiple parts of the speech, whether that is on the point that at a time when there are floods, there are other parts that have had scarcity of water, knowing that that is something that people could be sensitive about. Something you mentioned about how in the first term, despite issues of jobs and economy, votes came through for him, right? So now, on the ecology, on the fact that, as we said at the top of the conversation, there has been some unrest in the business community given the events that happened in Karnataka a few weeks ago. Does this speech, Amitabh, try to nip in the bud multiple points of potential unhappiness with him?
I would not say multiple points of unhappiness with him, but yeah, unhappiness with the overall government or with the general bureaucracy, because he's a very sharp politician and he understands that the businessmen or the kirana stores people were, or the traders were the traditional vote bank of the party. So in this speech, he talks to different audiences on different points of discontent or potential discontent in the future, or issues which could emerge as larger issues in the future and which could have an impact on his electoral fortunes. Right. So yeah,
All right, Mr. Joshi, there was only one mention, a single mention of the word Pakistan. The events that have followed after the revocation of Article 370, that part of what he said in that first block in the speech was nearly identical to his address to the nation on the 8th of August. I want to get a sense of whether he sees that purely as an administrative move. He wants to stick to the narrative and wants to pretty much ignore all the noise outside around it.
I think so. I think, as long as things don't go south in Kashmir, meaning as of now, we know there's a huge amount of police there. There's still a lockdown. But essentially even people like me who are very skeptical of that move will say, well, let's wait and watch. Because if you hear the Prime Minister, what's he saying? He's saying, look, we tried everything in 70 years, it didn't work, so now we are trying this. Now, even for me, that's a fairly reasonable statement that yes, for 70 years we've been doing something and it hasn't worked and maybe this will work. But the point is, at the end of the day, we are still waiting, because that is a judgment you can't make right now. As long as that whole place is under a lockdown, when the police is withdrawn, when we go beyond that, then we see what happens. But till then, I think the government is taking the view that this was an important internal administrative measure. It had nothing to do with external issues. And that's the message that our External Affairs Minister gave to his Chinese counterpart as well, that this has nothing to do with external borders, nothing to do with external issues. This is something to do with settling some internal issues administrative issues. And I think the Prime Minister will stick to it unless, as I said, things go south, things deteriorate in Kashmir, and then questions are raised. Then obviously other issues will come to the fore.
All right. I just want to round this off with what he followed through when on 370 when he said we finally have one nation, one constitution. The next line, Nilanjan, was saying the next conversation that needs to happen is one election. This keeps coming up intermittently. They mentioned it mid last year. At the time that they lost those 3 states, they went quiet on that. Now that they have a sense that after this Lok Sabha victory, they have a fair stretch of popularity in large parts of the country, the conversations come back. Administratively, this is something that you're going to have to move to over multiple cycles. This is not necessarily something you can abruptly end the life of multiple assemblies in the country. Why does this keep coming up from time to time? Unless they want to do something that will be immediate and administrative, which they've given no sign of.
Look, I mean, when I mentioned earlier this notion of centralization of power, I think one of the things that this government has done is sort of used a carrot and stick approach vis-a-vis the states, vis-a-vis the federal units in this country. And so when we think about even what has happened with Kashmir, right, there's clear signaling about what a government can do from the center in terms of using a governor to speak for the will of the state. Potentially, I know J&K is an exception. And so similarly, one nation, one election is a way of sort of using Modi's popularity and central popularity to weaken perhaps what is regional opposition. I think that this BJP, of course, sees the Congress as an opposition, but also sees that perhaps in the future its chief opposition might be these sort of certain strong regional leaders. And acting at this time to sort of weaken them is actually a pretty intelligent political move. And so I do think there are questions about the implementation of something like one nation, one election. But it falls very cleanly within the rhetoric of centralization and also weakening the sort of lower federal units and regional actors.
All right. On that note, Nilanjan Sarkar, Amitabh Tiwari and Manoj Joshi, thank you very much for making time to interpret the key messages from Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 6th Independence Day address. And if you have been, thank you for watching.